So we've been working on Bucky's ideas, and we've been working on two separate tracks. One is all these presentations on Sunday nights, okay, where you have these amazing people come and talk about their own take on Bucky's ideas, their own work based on it. But in addition to that, we want to make sure that people who are not familiar with Bucky's ideas ramp up on these ideas. So our original plan was, this part is being led by Maritza. I don't know, Maritza, if you can speak, but I'm going to give an introduction. So our original plan was to take critical path and go through the critical path. That was the plan. But then we realized that there was a better way to focus on the great ideas of Buckminster Fuller. Then it so happened that Curt was giving a presentation on the first chapter of his book, and he had this great slide, okay, which summarized, his take on the great ideas. I think it was as a result of a discussion at the TrimTab book club. So we started with that, and I think that's a very good place to start.
And the one I emailed you too, but while you do that, so some about the TrimTab book club. It grew out of a Buckminster Fuller Institute short series of short courses called Space Camps, and someone suggested a book club, and we put it together. So been meeting a 3 years maybe, and we alternate. We read a book by Bucky and then a book about Bucky. And because we were doing all this activity, the current staff at the Institute was involved in totally revamping the website. They had an old website that ran on a thing called Drupal or something like that, and it was hard to maintain, and they got an offer from the people that make WordPress to port it to a WordPress site, which is much more maintainable. And they found out in the process, excuse me, that some of the content on the Drupal site was not really linked correctly. So there was a high-level entry for big ideas. It didn't go anywhere. And then a number of the big ideas had text at different web pages, but they weren't linked in. And so we said, well, okay, let's redo the big ideas section. So we got the people in the book group to say, well, what do you think Bucky's big ideas are? So I was the one who collated it and put it together, and I put it in as a mind map because that's my the way I do things. And then a lot of it has now been incorporated in the new website. So if you go to Buckminster Fuller or bfi.org and about Fuller Big Ideas, you'll see a number of short essays, and we cover quite a few of these topics, but not all of them. So that's the background to the graphic.
Here. All right, folks. So sorry about all of this. Now we are back in business. All right. So let me give the introduction in my own way. I'm just talking about the mind map here. So you can see, I think mind map is a very powerful way of grasping something complex. And what Curt has done is that he has produced a mind map of Bucky's core teachings. At the first level, you can see the 5 nodes here. So you can see systems change, power of the individual, power of design, and shape of nature. Okay. What we did is that we discussed systems and systems change last time. But what I want to do is there are people here who know Bucky's ideas really well. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just read through the mind map very quickly and then invite people to comment on any particular part. I want to start with systems. So I want to do systems first, then system change second, then power of design, then power of the individual, and then shape of nature we will come to last. We can go 3 here. Give me a second. Let me go back here. Let's go 1, 2, 3, shape of the nature. So it's like systems. Universe is composed of systems. Bucky is all about understanding the change of systems, the shape of nature that results from systems and system change. Then we look at now it's a question of whether we do power of design first or power of individual first. Because power of design is basically how you design systems. So let's go to how we design systems, and therefore, what does it mean about the individual? So I'm going to just read out the headings here and then open it up for comments. We'll go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and any comments that people have. So on systems, we have, systems have shape. So there is systems. This is a beautiful thing about iPad here. Can zoom in. Systems have shape. They're distinct from the universe. They're more than the part. They have synergy. Everything is a system. Tetrahedron is the minimum system. Systems are multi-scale or multi-frequency. Let's take the second one on systems change. And then actually let's discuss these two first as the background for, I'll include third one as well. And then we'll discuss these 3 together. Then we'll go to design, and then we'll go to the individual. Individual will be the culmination because that brings everything together. Systems change, Precession, TrimTab, systems coupling, creating a new model that is broken up into common rules, social innovation, and co-op. What is the shape of nature designing that is results from this system and system change? There is the Buckminster Fullerene, tensegrity, tension and compression. Static shapes have structural integrity, dynamic processes have pattern integrity, and concentric hierarchy. So we will start with these topics. So systems change, and shape of nature. So folks, now all of you folks, there are many, many, many folks here who know this topic much better than I do. So please go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to talk about systems change, and shape of nature. The context here is this is for people who are trying to grasp Buckminster Fuller's ideas. So that's the audience. And so anything that you have to say to that audience, making the core ideas of Buckminster Fuller accessible to people. Would love to hear from you. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to comment. We'll start with Peter. Peter, go ahead.
Okay, and I'm going to leave my video off too, Shrikant, because I've had issues as well. Thank you again for doing this, Curt. I love the clarity that it gives. I'm just going to comment on one thing that was a quote that I go back to and sort of evolved so much of my thinking was the create a new model on systems change there. And Curt, I don't have the quote in front of me, but I'll try to do the best. You don't try to change what exists, create a new model so that the old way of doing things just disappear or just are no longer worthy because you have a better mousetrap is almost the concept there. So somebody I'm sure could find that quote, but that's really an important concept of people inventing better ways of doing things. Musk was mentioned a little earlier. He may be, the the Steve Jobs of our time when it comes to transportation and going to outer space and back. You know, the concept of landing that rocket ship back on a pad in the ocean, you know, was fantasy to me when I first even heard it. And, you know, he does it time and time and time again. So, you know, creating a new model that makes the old model obsolete is the way to change the world. And so that's such a powerful quote, and changed my life when I first read it. So that's an important part of this systems change graphic.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Next up is going to be Robert, followed by Richard. Robert.
Hi, Curt. I missed your presentation, but I did get to watch the video today, and I really enjoyed it very much. And while I was going through systems, it occurred to me, and you may have mentioned this in your commentary, but I didn't catch it. Blocked my intention, but I'll give it a shot. We were talking. I was discussing systems, or beginning to, and what I wanted to say was that systems don't really exist. They're a human concoction that can take almost any form you like, but they are very important because it's a tool that we use to modify nature, to, you know, bring power to the individual, and constantly change. We alter them for all different kinds of things. So on the one hand, they are invisible, but on the other hand, we use them as if they were available at any time, place, or event. And knowing and understanding systems is important, but it's also confounding to a lot of people. They make it too hard. If you look at systems as being a concoction of our own and a tool that we use, they lose a lot of their mystique and become more friendly to the casual person that encounters them. And I wonder if Curt would like to expand on that, maybe.
Give me just a second. Go ahead, Curt. Would you like to expand on that?
No, thanks, Robert. That's a great observation. And I mean, that's a big philosophical debate that's gone on for centuries, right? Far below Fuller. I read a book called System, and I'll have to find the author, Shrikant, and give it to you for the chat. And he explained that, you know, centuries ago, when we started writing about stuff, we just wrote our own personal accounts. In some cases, they were called natural histories, which doesn't mean what we mean today by history as like a sequence, a chronology of facts and dates. A natural history, you could have a natural history of trees, and what that was simply a discussion of everything this person knew about trees. And then at some point, and I'll say it's late 1600s, somebody wrote something and said, well, actually, if you look at these facts and put them together, they form, you know, a system. And so then the idea of system came into the written language, and I guess into the world of thought at that time. And from then on, if somebody said, well, here are the facts, you know, as we see them, but here's a way to organize them, that was then known as a system. And then the author says that, you know, then as we moved forward, we wound up saying, well, actually, there is some kind of systems in, you know, geology and other kind of systems in human affairs. And so then what they call the disciplines arose out of this whole thing. Eventually, he says that what happened was we've started blaming the system. Oh, it wasn't my fault, right? It was the company policy, it was the government, whoever is, somebody else is responsible for climate change, right? When we're now blaming the system. But back to your point. So system, what I just said would completely, I think, is congruent with what you said, Robert, which is that system was a way for a person to explain something about knowledge in a way that was organized and hopefully would help you remember it, right? So therefore it was essentially a construct. Now, I would guess that most people would say that the progress of science, the scientists believe that their models are getting closer and closer to reality. But I don't think there are any, actual scientists that claim their model matches reality, right? So in that case, I think we also agree with what you're saying, that these are things we construct, and if they're useful, right? If they help us understand things, and this is your final point, right? If we do it this way and help people understand things, they then feel a little bit more empowered, right? Like they have a little agency or way to change things. So kind of a long, wordy answer, but yes, I think that's a great insight.
Thank you. Thank you, Curt. Next up is Richard. Folks would love to hear from you. Please take your time to talk about these ideas. Richard, you're next.
Yes, thank you. I guess I want to take off on what Curt said first in reference to systems and modeling. And my understanding is that chemistry used modeling to a great extent to try and understand chemical systems and reactions. And von Hoft was the first that actually got a Nobel Prize in chemistry for the use of models. And Fuller was really concerned that the essence of modeling disappeared in science. And he really was trying to bring it back, to use modeling as an artifact of reality. And it certainly is a construct, that's for sure. So that might be something that we can discuss a little bit further this evening. But the other that I wanted to sort of look at was this idea of systems. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of my own sort of history in relation to systems. So when I studied in the 60s at McGill, systems was being introduced to my discipline of social work. And at that time, the best definition that I remember, there probably was more that was given to us in lectures or readings, but was the system was a set of interacting parts. So it had to do with interaction, it had to do with parts. But when I started to ask questions or read further to find out, well, how many parts does it take to make a system? No one could answer me. And it was usually, well, I don't know, many as you want, perhaps, well, minimum two. Probably have to have at least two things. So when I got introduced to Fuller's work in the 70s, mid 70s, he was very clear, and whether he was right or wrong didn't matter to me at that point. It was that he said a system as a set of interacting parts. And I think what he first was doing when he demonstrated the triangle necklace and bringing the necklace down into a triangle, he was saying that's a minimum two-dimensional system. So it's triangular, three edges, three points. But when we got into the notion of three-dimensional, or for some it might be four-dimensional, he said that the tetrahedron was the minimum, but not the minimum system, but the minimum whole system. So there's a difference between just a system, two-dimensional system, and a three-dimensional whole system. Then as so that was very important to me, and it helped me a great deal in my work and trying to turn that into some practical applications. But one of the things that was interesting, and I would like to have some discussion perhaps again tonight, is that then I discovered that the tetrahedron is the molecular structure of the carbon atom. And then I read about the carbon atom, or carbon being one of the core essences of life. And in my work, both in social work and in suicide prevention, then the essence of life as a configuration and a model became very important in terms of how the carbon molecule could in fact be a metaphor for the social constructs in terms of living. Now, others may have some thoughts on this, because I'm not sure whether that all fits in your minds in terms of the tetrahedron being the molecular structure of the carbon atom being the essence of life, and whether that kind of modeling can in fact be put to practical use in any number of disciplines. So that's just my introductory thoughts about systems.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Richard, I like this very much. So let us discuss systems. When we did this the first time, I found the points on the BFI website about systems to be really, really good. So I want to bring them into the discussion. So the fact that everything is a system, some of these points are captured here, but some of them, I think, kind of add to it. I like the focus of it. The next point is that systems have shape. So for me, that was huge, of like tetrahedrons, that they have a characteristic shape and are distinct from the surrounding. Other part, idea that all systems have an inside and an outside and a skin between that. That is a huge connection between nodes are known as relations, and what hold the system together. A relationship may be a flow, a force, or a field. Systems are not closed. At their boundaries, every node is linked to other surroundings. All system corners are leaky. They either have extra energy or need energy. And last one is systems exhibit synergy. There are comprehensive system behaviors in nature, unpredicted by the behavior of systems components, a phenomenon known to scientists as synergy. So the inside, outside, the shape, and the connectedness and the leakiness of systems, I think is very good. Let's see. So I would love any more comments on this. Let's go with Peter next. Peter, go ahead.
Thank you. And I'll put my video on just for a second to wave at everybody, and then I'm going to turn it off. So one of the work that I did for 30 years, as some of you know, had to do with long distance transmission, developing large renewable resources in places all around the world, whether they be solar installations, wind installations. They're abundant on every continent, but not usually where we work and live. So you need long distance transmission, high voltage AC DC transmission to deliver that from source to where we use it. So Bucky had called this the global electric energy grid, or it certainly isn't global yet. It's now regionalized in North America and Europe and in Russia and certainly other countries and growing across borders. But clearly it is the most integrated 24-hour 365 system that is complex. It is a shared system between utilities, public companies, private companies. Some of those are actual ministries in certain countries in terms of the sharing partner. And it is clearly a manifestation of one of the biggest systems that we have, that has nodes, that has connectors, and that enables us to live. It is the infrastructure that keeps the lights on and the TV and the beer cold and allows us to have this conversation. So I've always looked at this electrical network that we all use and sort of take for granted because it's in our world, There's still 1 billion people, many of them in Africa, don't have that system underneath to support their quality of life. But I love to speak to examples rather than metaphors here. So that's the example that I always go back to, as a highly interconnected system with nodes and connectors that is mutually beneficial far beyond any individual part.
Brilliant, brilliant, Peter, because I think that is one of the great examples, because you have the electricity flowing that can be produced through multiple means. It could be coal, and then there is, everything is being transformed in a way that can flow and that can be used in multiple places. It doesn't matter what form, what way it is created. It doesn't matter the way in which it is used. There are multiple uses, multiple things, but there is this thing in the middle which is doing the transmission and bringing it together. So brilliant example. Thank you, Peter.
And let me just
Can I make one comment?
Let Peter complete, and then it's going to be Peter, then Curt, and then Richard. Peter.
Yeah, sure. And I know we always speak of electron flow or current flow. There's a distinction here that it does not flow like water through a pipe. It is instantaneous. It is just excited electrons. So when you flip the switch, there is no real current flow in the sense of things moving through the wire. It's just immediate excitation of the molecules in that conductor. And a great example of this, and I use it a lot, is the nervous system in our body, which certainly is the electrical system in our human body. That if I disconnect the main nerve that goes to your arm is no longer useful and atrophies, and that's a little bit like Africa today. It's not connected to the rest of the system, so it doesn't have the benefit of that interconnection and of that energy that is available if it were. So there's and if you touch any part of that system on your body, if you touch your forehead or anywhere, you immediately, because it's instantaneous, feel it into your, I suppose, into your brain, and however we receive that information, it's immediate. So if you want a good example of the interconnected electrical grid in the world, our nervous system in our body is a microcosm of that.
Wonderful, Peter. I trained as an electrical engineer, so I spent a lot of time looking at generators and the at different voltages. How do you move the electricity and the voltages involved there? How do you protect the electricity? What kind of insulation that you need at every level? It's just amazing example of a system in action. So great. Thank you for bringing that up. It brings back great memories, and I think it is one of the great examples. And I think I also like your drawing the similarity between that and our nervous system, because that's how we function. That's the system, and that's how we function. And what bringing up these examples do is that it really shows you what this concept is and how powerful it is and how crucial it is to understand the world. Thank you, Peter. Next up is Curt, followed by Richard, and then Jon, and then Joe. Curt.
Thanks for letting me jump in. Yeah, Peter, thank you. And hopefully this helps people. I mean, countries could each have their own electrical power system, and they could be disconnected. But Bucky saw that by being connected across the boundaries, you would start to break down these artificial things, right? He considered the boundaries and nation states a bad idea, I think anyway, that it was a one world thing. So therefore, what was a currency, quote unquote, that could be shared across boundaries? Electricity. And many of us have traveled to other countries, and what do you have to do? You have to change money. Well, there's somebody that's charging you, right, to change the money. And what Bucky was saying is, if we connect all the systems up together across the boundaries, all of a sudden that doesn't happen. We have the shared thing. And then what happens if, country A has a little, a need, doesn't have enough. Well, if it's connect on the grid to country B, and they have more, it just resolves itself. So to me, there's a, you know, I'm just sort of building, I hope, on what you're saying, Peter, and saying it's a really good example. So thank you.
Thank you, Curt. Next up is going to be Richard, followed by Jon.
Yeah, thank you again. That's what I want to do in speaking to the concept that Peter's laid out is the notion of all of the known nodes and the interconnections as far as the electrical grid is concerned. We can also include the unknown nodes or the nodes that are not yet connected. And that way you get the full mapping system, and instantly you can see where the grid is and where the grid could be. And that's what I find exciting about the whole idea of systems mapping, that you can include the known and the unknown. And in some cases, you might even include the notion of probably the never to be known. Could be the mystery of the universe. But at least you can put it in a node form and either have an actual connection, like maybe a so-called solid line, or you can have dotted lines that connect to the ones that we hope that someday will in fact be connected. And just one last comment is, I have my own memory of Peter in 1995 when he was the principal sort of organizer of Bucky's 100th birthday anniversary, and I made a special trip to get down to make sure I was there. And then tonight, I just realized as we were introducing Chris, and you asked him about ecological design. Well, I have the ecological design film that I didn't realize it was his, and I've had it for many years, and it's a delightful film to see all of the outlaws that are covered in that film, including Bucky and John Todd and various others.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. And in addition to the electrical power system and the neurological system that we have, the other big system which is there is the connection between 8 billion of us, the social system that puts, that makes the kind of global civilization possible. So that's another system. So that's something that you work on. So wonderful. Next up is going to be Jon. Jon, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking back to the idea of the tetrahedron being used as a metaphor. And what I love about it is the structure. When we try and look at any particular thing, we'd like to divide it up into bits and pieces, even though it's a whole. So, like the body is made up of lots of bits and pieces, but it's a whole. And our personality or psychology or behavior can be thought of in terms of 4 different kinds. And the beauty of the tetrahedron, which is the simplest possible structural system, is that it doesn't have any opposite faces. So why not look at personality and so on in terms of like a tetrahedron? There's lots of metaphors you can get from the shape. That's typical of any system, and it has interdependencies. So there's 4 sides. This one side touches every other side. So if you change it, you change every other side. So it's a great demonstration of interdependence, which we experience out there, and as people, we experience this a lot too. And obviously our body is a great example of how you can mind and body are interdependent, and the different organs are interdependent. So this is a great reminder when you look at the structural system, simplest possible structural system, and a way of thinking about things in terms of interdependence, instead of our normal way of looking at cubes and saying, what are the two opposites I can get that are polar opposite? I think it's a very useful metaphor.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. Next, let's go to systems change. There are three headings on the BFI website that I found really powerful. The idea of TrimTab, like, where is the point of maximum leverage with which you can change this entire course of a ship? That's one concept. The second is that of systems interactions. Try to understand what the system interactions are. The next one is about creating a whole new model. Instead of just fixing something, fixing an existing model, if it is broken, you can build and supplant the model. And the last one is design as a way of doing that. So any thoughts about change of systems? How do you change systems? I mean, if Bucky was about anything, he was about how can one man change the world? And the way to do that is to change the systems, because world is composed of systems. So would love your thoughts on that. We'll start with Richard. Richard. Richard, you need to unmute. Let's check. Richard, you need to unmute. Give me a second. Let's see what's going on. Let's see, where is Richard? There. Richard, can you go ahead and unmute, please? Yes, go ahead. Yes, we can hear you now, Richard. Go ahead.
Oh, can you? Okay. I was just going to say that when I hear the word TrimTab, the first thing that comes to my mind is out of the chaos theory and the concept of sensitive dependence on initial conditions, and that out of that you can have what's called the butterfly effect, and the fact that a little thing can create a big change, whether it's positive or negative. And so it'd be interesting to combine those two in our conversation tonight about TrimTab and the way in which it's talked about in Fuller's language, and sensitive dependence on our initial conditions and the way it's talked about in nonlinear chaos theory kinds of science.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Next up is Peter. Peter, go ahead.
Okay, great. I wanted to jump in with Curt a little bit on Precession. I'm going to turn the video off again because it's, for me, one of those that I just said, I don't get it when I heard about it originally. It's a simple little model where the hummingbird or the honeybee is going to pollinate. That doesn't really going to pollinate. He's just going for the nectar. That's his job, is to go for the nectar. Our job in the world usually is to go get some kind of income stream so we can pay our rent and do the things that we have to do. But at 90 degrees, when the honeybee is going after the nectar, he grabs the pollen and pollinates some other plant. So now we have fruit in the garden. And it's that wasn't the purpose of the honeybee. It happened inadvertently, inadvertently at 90 degrees. That so much of life happens not intentionally. It happens at 90 degrees because you're moving. As long as you're moving forward, there's this inadvertent relationships that happen that can also cause system change in this case. And I've always found that to be an interesting result of just going after what you think you're supposed to be doing. we all have this, how can I either make a difference or make money for my family or whatever that is. But it at some inadvertent level, there's this magic that occurs that is outside anything we can plan.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. Next up is going to be Joe, and then I would request Curt, and I know Jon has talked about Precession as well. So let's go with Joe first, and then we will have Curt and Jon talk about Precession. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a brief comment about system change, and it's not necessarily on the mind map, but the idea of gestation periods is actually very important when you're talking about change, because there's a timing that essentially that has to occur. You have to time things correctly. The market has to be ready to accept the change when it occurs. There have been ideas that have come along, and Bucky has actually been the victim of them in certain cases where he's been ahead of his time. And so I think that understanding when a product is ready to go to market is very important related to systems change. And he talks about that with gestation periods using various examples within the automobile industry and things along those lines.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Richard. And then if Jon and Curt want to comment on Precession. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was actually wanting to speak to Precession.
Please do.
What I've done in my field is I've looked at Precession in terms of the axis between two people and the interchange that might happen there. And what they do is they create motion perpendicular to the axis of their relationship. So for me, it's a way of conceptualizing how two people in my work, it's the helper and the helpee, if you want, interchange with each other to move from problem to solution. And the process from problem to solution is that 90-degree sort of direction that you generate. And so I look at it as a possibility also of setting up not inadvertent sort of change, but actually intentional change by understanding Precession and how the axis can the relationship in the axis between two or more people can create movement perpendicular to the axis of that relationship. So I'd like to, see what people think of that. I don't know if I've got the right interpretation or not.
Thank you, Richard. Next up is Jon.
Yes, I kind of agree with the idea that you can predict precession, but often it's set in such a complex environment that there's no way we are going to understand the environment enough to be able to predict it. But precession is actually a physics phenomenon that is measurable. And the typical example for that is when you're riding a bike. So the wheels are spinning, and when you try and turn a spinning wheel, it automatically creates a force that's at right angles to the way that you're trying to turn. So precession is in most cases predictable, unless it's in a very complex situation, like when a bee is traveling to, when you're talking about behavior especially. So you can think about when you're doing anything, you're guaranteed to create either if you've moved, there's a space behind you that you've moved from that somebody else may fill, and you've created a momentum or a direction of a force that is going to affect other things around you as well. So I'm guessing that there's always precession happening, and some of it we can anticipate.
Thank you, Jon. So I have a question for Curt, if you want, Curt. I mean, there are these at least there are these points about precession, systems coupling, TrimTab, and creating a new model. And the question I have for Curt and for anybody else who wants to answer it is that it looks like, precession is a result of systems coupling. So the systems are coupled, therefore there is an effect different at a perpendicular angle to what you were trying to create because these systems are coupled. So there is systems coupling and precession seem to be connected to one another. The TrimTab and create a new model seem to be as strategies, of saying that TrimTab saying that, okay, there is this large system going, I can find the point of maximum leverage in order to change its course. And creating a new model is to say, wait a minute, this ship is going in the wrong direction. I can't, instead of trying to do stuff to it by trying to figure out the systems coupling here and precession here and coming up with TrimTab, I'm better off doing a parallel system, which is going to supplant it. And when do you do that? What are the issues involved? What are the relationship between these four things? So any thoughts, anybody? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. Curt, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so it was one of the things that was very gratifying, to be able to put this knowledge sort of together, right? Bucky's been saying all this for decades, but it was never put in one place, right? That it was all different approaches to systems change. And of course, he's most well known for TrimTab. That's his epitaph, right? Call me TrimTab. And as you undoubtedly all know, that, the TrimTab is this little tiny edge to rudder on a rudder on a ship. And it's been around for centuries. It comes from nature. So it's a biomimicry thing, right? The very the ends of the wingtips on the birds are TrimTabs. They just move a little bit and all of a sudden the bird is off in another direction. And so it has to do with flow and has to do with direction, et cetera. So Bucky really loved it because he saw that if he was in the right situation, he could kind of be the TrimTab. In other words, he could make a small change that would result in a bigger change. When we think about the ship metaphor, we quickly get stuck, right? Because we're just like, well, none of us can move the Queen Mary, which is what, he used to call the example. But of course, then we can think of, well, maybe it's not just maybe fossil fuel or, traditional agriculture is not just one huge ship. It's maybe a bunch of medium-sized ships. And then maybe you can change a medium-sized ship. Or it's a whole bunch of little ships like all of us, and we can change little ships. So, but anyway, to your point, Shrikant, yes, it's about changing the direction of an existing system without really changing the system itself. So we have that. We jump to the other end, we have Bucky's sort of second most famous quote, don't fight the existing system, create a new model. And he did that over and over again, right? He created new models for housing, for automotive, just the bathroom project, if you look into that ever, he created new models for that. And really, that wasn't like his unique idea, right? So, many people, Elinor Ostrom got a Nobel Prize for studying commons rules and sort of upending the theory that people can't manage commons. The answer is no, people can manage commons as long as you put them in charge. So, and she put together a set of rules of commons that she actually gathered from talking to indigenous people and people who'd been managing fisheries and forests for a long time. So that's a new model. Cooperatives are a new model. Many things that Bucky made was a new model. And so then, Bucky's saying at a certain point, it's just not worth your time to TrimTab that big boat, right? Create a new model, do a different thing. And then as I think you alluded to, that's a systems transition, right? So the new model is coming up like microcredit, these tiny loans, the Grameen Bank and et cetera, and do you have to then sort of what they call midwife, another model, it's probably more clear in organizations where you're trying to implement a new procedure and you want to get rid of the old one. Okay, then what's in the middle? The other thing in the middle is sometimes we call it systems coupling or interconnection, and this has all to do with those corners of the tetrahedron, right? The tetrahedron isn't all closed up. It's got what's called leaky corners. We are all polyhedra. Shrikant is a very multifaceted polyhedra. Yes, many interests, many connections to many people, many inputs, many outputs. All of us are sort of like that. And we're leaky, right? Which means that we need things, and obviously the obvious things, food and water and et cetera. And then we also need input, like meetups, right? Shrikant needs input from meetups, we can tell us, right? And we do too. And then we have outputs, creative outputs, and et cetera. So then this is kind of the basics, that we're all these sort of leaky polyhedra coupling together, and it's just the nature of the universe. The precession is a very related idea. It comes from Bucky saying, well, the standard physics model is incorrect. Standard physics model says, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Well, that's not true. Nothing cancels each other out. There's always some extra. That's the precession. And that's the pollinator picking up the pollen, like Peter was saying, or as Richard was saying, that's in the conversation. I'm not going to convince you. You're not going to convince me, but we're going to learn a little something. It's going to change a little bit outside of the interaction, right? And then work for it. So we do think there's sort of a science, if you will, or practice of design for interaction, design for precession. I think it's related to regenerative design. I think regenerative design at its core talks about, systems being interconnected and giving and receiving, as opposed to being extractive. It's kind of unexplored territory, but it's very rich. And I think Bucky gives us some really good guideposts for it. So there's a little bit, maybe too many words, but some ideas there.
Excellent. Thank you, Curt. So next, what I want to do is, let me see if I can move this here to the shape of nature. Give me a second here. There. Shape of nature. I don't know. Does anybody want to comment on all these points? The distinction between static shapes having structural integrity versus dynamic processes that have pattern integrity, the concept of tensegrity, the concentric hierarchy, and Buckminster Fullerene. So we're going to start with Peter. Would love to hear everybody's comments on this. Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, great. And again, I'm going to stop my video so I don't kick myself off. I'm just going to take the one and I loved this in the Bucky play when and it just, I don't know how to use it, but it is such a valuable concept that Bucky says that we're all a pattern integrity, that that's what a human being is. And I just shook my head and said, what the hell are you talking about? And he used the example of a knot on a string. He said, didn't matter the kind of string, that if you do a simple overhand knot, and whether it's on cloth, string, or nylon or whatever, the knot still has a pattern integrity all its own in each of those special cases of material. And that's what a human being is, that we all are individual pattern integrities, that we lose our entire cellular skin and everything. I think every 7 years it changes, but we're still me. I'm still me. Shrikant is still Shrikant. We're all our own still continuous pattern through our lives. And then he says, when we pass away, the knot goes off the end of the string, and where does it go? So that's just a concept I don't really know what to do with. I just loved it as an idea, and maybe there's something to comment there in terms of how to use that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter. I really like Bucky's quote, I'm a verb. I really like that. Next up is going to be Richard. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to the idea of shape. Mm-hmm. and how it kind of relates, in my mind anyway, to tensegrity, and tensegrity having the mixture of compression and tension. And so very often what we do is, when we ask how people are how well they are, if you want, we often will say something like, well, how are you today? which is really a focus on the person. And in that sense, to me, it's a focus on the compression element. And I have tried in my context, asking people, what's your shape today? And shape then can be whatever you decide it to be. It might be your physical shape, it might be your mental shape, it might be that sort of thing. And when you also relate shape to fractals, you see that the shape changes from a long distance view of something to a very close-up view. A long distance view will look like it's a smooth circular shape, let's say. And when you get up close, you can then see all the nicks and crannies and so forth. So when you use fractal numbers from, I think it's 0 to 3, you can actually, anything close to 0 means you're in poor shape. You're feeling bad or down, or anything close to 3 is good shape. So I can now do a baseball code kind of notion of shape, because I can say, what's your shape today? And you can say it's 0.25. And I know that I should maybe leave you alone or offer support. But if you say it's 2.95, then I can say you're ready to solve the problems of the world, and you can take on anything sort of in a complex nature today. And so you could have a code system that speaks to shape in terms of like the pitcher and the baseball numbers, in terms of what kind of pitching throw is going to come next. But anyway, so shape to me is that outside sort of boundary description of how we are doing physically, mentally, socially.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to comment? I think this distinction between static and dynamic is huge, because most people's thinking is too static. They're all, and thinking in the dynamic, thinking in terms of processes, it's one level higher. And I think it's much more consonant with what living is. So any more comments on this? Otherwise, what we're going to do is, what I want to do next is I want to go to the ultimate thing. We are going to spend a lot of time on design anyway. So let's keep that aside. But ultimately, all of this work culminates into the view of the individual. What did Bucky think about the power of the individual? So humanity has a purpose, operational mathematics, learn from our mistakes. Would love to hear what you think was Bucky's thought on the power of the individual. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to share. We'll start with Peter.
Being very verbose this evening.
Please, please. I like everything that you've said has been very concise and very powerful. So thank you. I always say, I used to say be brief, but now I say be concise, because if somebody is making amazing points, the more they speak, the better. So you've been very concise. You've been amazing. Please go on.
I'm gonna do one that again was very powerful for me when and it's that small little line at the end. There's enough for all. I remember when I first saw Bucky at the local community college. I was a high school senior, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but essentially the question that the moderator asked to Bucky. Bucky, you said that there's enough for all. Can you explain that? Because clearly we all live in a world of scarcity, not enough time, not enough money, not enough of anything, right? That's how scarcity economics really exists, and why we have this huge supply and demand problem. And he went off on a 2-hour tour of the universe that was just so far above my head. And again, I'm a high school senior, I didn't know what he said, but at the end, everybody was just in awe that they went, oh, there's enough for all. And it comes around to the work that I got involved in. When you look at the energy potential of our planet in terms of its income energy, it's solar, it's wind, it's geothermal, it's all of those income streams of energy are thousands of times more than we could ever use or need if we just harvested them. So that for me was the powerful understanding that if we could not only prove to, I guess, speak it, that there's enough for all, but then ultimately set up the world in a way that there is, if there's enough for energy for everybody, then there's enough water for everybody, then there's enough education for everybody, then the notion of scarcity starts to diminish. The reason for war also is appeased. So it's such a powerful, simple statement there that I don't think people realize that we live in a world or a belief system of there isn't enough, there's scarcity, but Bucky didn't.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Next up is Robert. Folks, go ahead and type ! to give your comments on Bucky's view of the individual. Robert.
Well, my favorite one here is learn from our mistakes, which is a premise that I've always not followed, but fallen into, I guess is a better way to put it. It can be very detrimental to, particularly to young people, but us elders as well, when you suffer from your mistakes. People take it out on you, you lose credibility and all of those things. But, and this is, I'm sure, Bucky's intention, mistakes are ways you learn and you profit from your mistakes. Even if your mistakes affect others, the others can profit from it as well, because short of being something totally disastrous, you use your mistakes to not repeat the same things, but to repeat the action and do it differently. And another thing I wanted to add on here to the there's enough for all piece is the universal basic income. And that triggered in my mind, and I'm going to send this back to Curt because he can probably expound on it more than I can. But Bucky called it energy slaves, that the world had I don't know what to call it, but like a currency of energy per person, and that energy was basically cost free, and you could use it like it was a slave, not having to suffer the consequences of using it and sharing it.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Curt, would you be willing to comment on this, as well as I wanted to ask you the question about, this is in some ways the most philosophical, because it goes to the heart of who we are as human beings. So how did you choose these particular things? Could you talk about this entire node here of power of the individual?
Okay. Well, in many ways, it was Bucky's most fundamental teaching. I mean, he gets a lot of attention for the artifacts and the synergetics and system change, but really his core message, I mean, the reason people loved him, followed him around, changed their lives, was he communicated clearly that they had the power to make a difference. And in fact, it was kind of the only thing, right, that could make a difference. It was really just the individual. He held himself up as an example, of course, that, he was this kid who dropped out of college a couple times and just kept after it, just kept beating his head against the wall. And, was Peter's comment, he learned from his mistakes, and he had a lot, right? He had so many to the point where he considered suicide. And then he just decided to, double down, if you will, and go back at it. So really, I think it's his core teaching, and the reason, once again, that people are inspired by his work. The rest of it is really important, but I think it's the core thing. Now, what did I say? Everybody here has a purpose. What is that purpose? Well, he put this in context of humanity has a purpose. Often, if you go around and interviewed 100 people and you asked them, are people good for the planet? Most of us would say no. We're just trouble, right? And Bucky would say, no, we're here for a reason, right? The universe has evolved us or come up with us. And so then we've got to work together to figure this out. And I've read a number of interesting things in this recently, but the idea that we can be involved actively in regeneration at this point, would be a key thing to do with it. So just emphasizing that really, I think this is core teaching. Now, a number of things came up in the discussion. A couple are mentioned here. And one is that he felt that society as it's developed was not giving the individual his or her due, right? We were de-geniusing the kids. We're making people struggle for the basic needs. And so he basically recommended universal basic income. I don't even know how many decades ago. And I think it's Utopia for Realists. The author nicely goes through and looks at all the actual cases where they tried things like it and said, well, you know what, it works. Universal healthcare, it works. All the stuff really works. Bucky's point being that if your needs are satisfied, then you're able to contribute to the greater whole. And we're going to come up with better and better solutions. So there's a big bunch of it tied in that. And then there's a big bunch of it tied into that systems change, right? And making the world a better place, which we talked about previously. The operational mathematics. So that's, what's he really saying? He's saying that we can't believe what other people tell us. We need to think for ourselves, to work with the evidence of our senses, and to just choose the things, right? The operational mathematics means choose the quote unquote math that fits the situation, as opposed to the math that somebody else told you, right? They could say the math of scarcity is what we have to do. And you're like, well, no, I'm looking at this big system and I'm seeing that in general, when we provide for people, more good stuff happens. So that's the operational mathematics I'm taking. So I've kind of danced around a little bit, but I think, if you've studied any of Bucky, looked at his lectures, seen any of the memes, you'll recognize that the power of the individual is very, very strong. So I don't know if that really addressed what you asked.
Yeah, no, that was a great way of putting it. Thank you. And I agree with you that's really the heart of the whole appeal of Bucky, and that's really what he is to offer us. The thing that blew me away is his description of his experience at the age of 32. Because it's kind of learn from the mistakes, not just your own, but everybody's, everybody takes like the culture and how people think as given, and when you do that, you're not learning from mistakes. You're just taking everybody's mistakes on, including your own, and refusing it. So this operational mathematics is the way of saying that I will commune with my own experience using my senses, my way of putting things together. I will use the context that I have. And if I'm making mistakes, I will correct them as I go along. And that is the core. That's really the power, right? That's the source of the power. Only if you're doing that, then you have the power to do anything. So wonderful. Thank you. Would love to hear from Richard or Jon about this, about just at a very high level of what is the view of individual that Bucky had. What do you say about that? Let's go with Jon first. Jon.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Bucky, but what I learned from this about there's enough for everyone. It's a kind of a journey to realize that, and we found that with our house. We have a new house here, and we designed it for self-sufficiency. And then when we look back, we realized that we're actually ended up with something that's actually way more than we need. What we should have been aiming for was shared sufficiency. And I think that's really what Bucky was thinking when he was imagining there's enough for everyone. There's not enough for everyone if we're aiming for self-sufficiency. That won't work. But if we aim for shared sufficiency, like Peter Meisen's suggesting with electricity, share it, then it's easily possible. If only we could work out how to share, how to trust each other enough to share.
Thank you.
Yoshimi
Thank
wants
you,
to say something too.
Yes, Yoshimi, welcome.
On the side.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the empowerment of the individual.
Yes.
Yeah, Bucky said, what can one person do? I'm just an individual. But he proved that he could do a heck of a lot. But his bottom message was nothing does it on its own in nature. And so the only way that we're going to succeed is to work interdependently. It has to involve all of us. That's the only way we'll create synergy. So we go back to Bucky's principles of interdependence, diversity, and synergy. Those three things, and then you throw in precession. Nature's principles encapsulate everything that we are doing, and that's why all our work, everyone in this meeting today, it's really about empowerment of the individual. We learn ourselves, because until we heal ourselves, when we heal ourselves, we heal nature. When we all heal, when I heal myself, I heal nature. But when we collectively heal ourselves, we heal nature and we move forward. So hallelujah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yoshimi. Really appreciate that, and great to see you. Richard, what do you think about the view of individual of Bucky? If you could unmute.
Yeah, I'm going to start with what Jon just said around shared sufficiency. And it comes back to TrimTab. And for me, the real TrimTab in the language, our words, is the prefix co. And it's a powerful little TrimTab in my mind. And so I would say what Jon just said about shared sufficiency, I would substitute shared with co-sufficiency. And if we could have a world that was full of co's, I think it would make a big difference. And even in the language of anti-racism, I've been trying to figure out whether or not the prefix co could be something like co-racial instead of anti-racism or something along that line. But on the individual, one of the things that I really was struck by Bucky's thinking is that he said in order for there to be self, there had to be awareness, and in order for awareness, there has to be otherness. So if you reverse order that, you end up with if there's no otherness, there's no awareness, there's no self. So his concept of unity, if you want, is minimum two, then that tells me that self and otherness coexist. You can't have one without the other. And so the individual is nothing without other, and without other, there are no individuals. That's my kind of thinking on it based on that particular reference to Bucky's thinking.
Thank you, Richard. I like that, CJ. You will find this in the core project that CJ has of collaborating for comprehensivity. So collaborating for comprehensivity. So you're trying to be comprehensive, and the only way to do that is to collaborate. So that is something that, you know, we are all doing here. I mean, this conversation is a great way of seeing that. So wonderful. Thank you, Richard. Mike, what do you think about Bucky's view of the power of the individual? Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I endorse what everybody has said. He thought the individual was important. He thought that if you treat the individual right in society, he has the power to make a significant impact, a Renaissance type impact. And each person can create a positive change. But with science and technology as it is, from what he saw, and it's exponentially bigger than what he saw, the important thing is individuals have to learn how to work together. He said that everything, not just people, the carbon atom in particular, the silicon atom, are all connected together. And the tetrahedron, it's no coincidence that its tetrahedron matches carbon's valence of 4 and how protein folding works. Now, he also said that we're all interconnected. People are interconnected, almost like Jung's collective consciousness. I think he actually used that term in the spaceship, in the spaceship Earth thing, but I gleaned that out of that. So he defined something called the ripple effect. 1 + 1 is, we think, is 2. But 1 + 1 is 11. 1 + 1 is 11,000. Because you show me 10 who are stout-hearted men, and I'll soon show you 10,000 more.
Wonderful.
The interconnectedness is important.
Thank you, Mike.
I got another 35 minutes if you want it.
No, okay. We will spread it across the next 30 meetups. Ripple effect came
from his critical path arrangement.
No, wonderful. Mike, always amazing to have you here, and really appreciate your erudition. No matter what topic it is, you have amazing things to say. So, folks, so let's again look at the whole here. So, any thoughts about this? So, firstly, I really like this diagram, because I think this is a great start to look at, you know, Bucky's thought as a whole. So I'm really grateful to Curt for this. So would love any comments of just approaching Bucky's ideas through a mind map like this. What did you guys think? Go ahead and type ! if you would like to share. We're going to start with Peter. Peter, go ahead. Peter, you need to unmute.
Yep. Sorry. Thank you very much. I love mind maps a lot myself. I make them all the time, often when I'm taking notes. I want to encourage Curt, or anybody could do this, to add value. I try, especially when this boils down to almost a word or two for each of these things, to turn it into a graphic. You know, with the graphic precession, I know that that's the honeybee going after the flower and the pollination that goes on it. There's There's a potential graphic for each one of these, and the more you can take this visual and even enhance the visualization, the more powerful it is. So just a request, Curt, when you have your spare moments of genius.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. All right. Any more comments, folks? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to comment on this entire map as a whole or ideas of Bucky as a whole. So I don't know, is Maritza, are you able to speak? Because Maritza is the one who is doing this project for us here. She's the one leading the project. But I'm going to talk a little bit. You know, this is something that we're going to do. You know, we started with the idea of ephemeralization. Maritza.
Yes.
Yes. What do you think of this discussion? Isn't so? Go ahead. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Go ahead.
No, so I'm fascinated by the concept of just diving into some of these big ideas. And I really like the opportunity to bring them down to like the average person's level, because if you look at them, you know, just if you only look at certain topics, like if you just look at ephemeralization, that's almost off-putting because it seems a very difficult thing to grasp. So I really like that what we're doing is we're breaking it down to allow folks to understand what the concepts means for them and how it might perhaps be practically applied in our day-to-day. And I see you doing that here with the mind map as well, not just you, but with the folks who helped to create it, you know, putting out things, even like, you know, you see, we just talked about learn from your mistakes. It's a very big concept, but when it's put in that manner, we can, all of us, relate to the importance of it. So I think that some of the magic that we're doing here with this series is bringing Bucky's ideas to the level of everyday use, which I think sometimes is kind of hard to do if you're just reading his works, because they're such big concepts that we can get lost and fail to realize that the most important thing is to figure out how to apply these in our day-to-day lives. So
yeah, thank you, Marisa. I mean, that's really the core of what we are doing here with this series. You know, this was CJ's vision, and this was actually Bucky's vision as well. You know, he thought, you know, when you say, you know, power of the individual, the only way individual has the power is if he can use all these ideas, if he can take ideas, if he can think at this level. So what we are trying to do, and this is actually what we do at 52 Living Ideas, this is our tradition. It doesn't matter what we are looking at, whether it is Louis Sullivan or Harold Nelson or Bhagavad Gita or Gospel of John or Tao Te Ching. We're always trying to take something and make it accessible to everybody. And this is especially important with Bucky because his entire approach is, you know, I think Curt is right. This power of the individual is the foundation of everything that he's saying. Because if an individual cannot design systems by understanding systems that are appropriate for human beings, all human beings, then the individual doesn't have the power. That's the only way for individual to have the power. And unfortunately, a lot of Bucky's writing is not as accessible as it can be. So this entire effort of, number one, getting people who really know these things to talk and to make sure that anybody, because this is not just these meetups, these videos are going to live on YouTube. So if somebody wants to figure out these ideas, we want to make it as easy for them as possible, as motivating for them as possible. Again, I love this fourfold path which CJ outlined for us. Whether it is through design, by working with your hands on building things, whether you're doing it mathematically through the geometry of Bucky, whether you're doing it through holistic integrations, through integrities, or whether you're doing it because you want to collaborate with other people. So all those four things are crucial, and everything that we are doing kind of appeals to all four, some of them more than the others. So that's why I think this is very important. Also, we want people who are working on Bucky's ideas to see the impact of their ideas on the world, and whatever little we can do to give more prominence to them, make those ideas their own ideas, which they have themselves produced, make it more accessible to everybody else. That's good for them. So I'm very, very excited about this. So we're going to go to Richard and then Joe. Richard.
Yeah, on this whole discussion of the individual and how important the individual is from Bucky's perspective, it also takes me to the work of Lynn Margulies and what she did in microbiology. And she made a statement in one of her books that said that when you get right down to it, the individual is an illusion. I think she was really talking about the importance of the collectivity. She obviously talks about the importance of collaboration and so forth. So it'd be interesting to have a dialogue in terms of her view of individual being an illusion and our sort of sense that Bucky's view of the individual as being very prominent and very important.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm just tremendously grateful to you, Richard, Curt, John, Peter, Robert, and everybody who's here to kind of share, your generosity in sharing what you know. So we really, really appreciate it. And along with me, Maritza, Rupali, Joe is a critical part of this entire project. So Joe, what do you think?
The thing that I really like about this is that we have a group of people here that actually use Bucky's concepts in everyday life. Richard has talked about how he uses it in suicide prevention and how the connections actually work together. John has talked about how they use it in organizational dynamics. How people walk out of organizations with a greater understanding of their own personal management teams. I actually took the time to speak to one of his colleagues outside of this meetup that use the TetraMeme, and they talked about in detail how effective it has been in their business, and they have consultants all over the world. So I think Peter's examples of how energy is used, these are real world examples that are bringing Bucky's ideas for life to life. And I think that that's what is really effective. As you said already, these videos are going to live on forever. And so I think that that's what really is allowing us to now understand the metaphysical and the physical. And so that's how I see this endeavor. And I think what Curt has laid out as a framework for Bucky's ideas is extremely helpful, and it's extremely difficult to do. It's extremely difficult to do, to consolidate all of Bucky's ideas. So anyway, those are my, that's my thought, is that this is where the rubber hits the road. And so I appreciate everybody showing up and sharing their thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to say one more thing. When I met CJ first, and he mentioned to me that he was writing a book, my first major point I made to him, that was on around July 4, 2020, was that do meetups only on your book. And that is the reason, what it does is it accelerates. See, we are individual and we are social. We are social solitaries. Okay, so what it did was that he was able to pretty much finish the book. Only last chapter was unfinished. So we have all of that. And during this time, there has been he has had tremendous impact, including this entire project. This would not have been if he had not done all the meetups. Because what it does is that we are social beings. We are individual beings and we are social beings. So there is a tremendous value to be gained by speaking about your ideas to other people. Bucky is a great example. I can't do meetups for 14 hours at a stretch. I do 10 meetups per week. So I do them over, I spread it out over the week. I'm not able to do 14 hours like Bucky, but the principle is the same, that this conversation, it is both ways. It is two-way. You speaking about your ideas and people telling you what they thought of it, and you incorporating that. That is the fastest way of learning, no matter what stage you are in. So, I'm inviting all of you, people who are here and people who are listening to this on YouTube, to reach out to us and to see what we can do together. My email address is 52livingideas@gmail.com. And I'm very, very grateful to everybody. All right. If anybody has any final comments, you're welcome. So Peter, I really liked your comments today, because what you did was that for each of those major categories, you actually put before us the actual physical system to which we know the largest examples of the application of these ideas. So it really, really helped a great deal. And thank you, Curt, for producing that. And thank you very much, everybody. We will see you soon. Bye, everybody. Oh, I have to tell you, the next one is going to be Doug. Okay, Doug is going to be back, and he's going to be talking about dramaturgical synergies. So synergies in drama. He was thinking of talking about application of I am a verb to drama, and then he has changed the title to dramaturgical synergies. So don't miss that. It's going to be something. If you know Doug, you know that you don't want to miss that. It's going to be next Sunday. See you folks. Bye.